people have been in a situation where students say, oh, I can't understand his or her accent? I'm kind of complaining about this. Quite a few, yeah, quite a few, and maybe some people online as well. And do you ever get the feeling that they really feel it's that speaker's problem and it's their fault that they can't understand? One of our roles as teachers is perhaps to raise students' awareness of the responsibility of the listener in avoiding communication breakdown, and that this is a two-way street, this intelligibility. And so what can we do to encourage this kind of responsibility? One thing is to encourage students to signal non-comprehension. So when students are trying to negotiate meaning between them, they need to show the other person if they don't understand what's being said. They might be reluctant to do this if that's their friend in the class. They don't want to upset or embarrass that person. Or maybe it's culturally not so acceptable to interrupt somebody, to say that you don't understand. But we need to make it clear to our students that the best person to indicate that there is a breakdown of communication is the other person in that communication. And we need to promote an atmosphere where that's okay to do so, and it's okay to do so maybe even the second or the third time to still say, I still don't understand. We can maybe point out to our students that if they don't do this, if they don't signal that they haven't understood, then how can their friend improve their pronunciation? If they don't know that they've got an issue with a high-risk area, thinking about the lingua franca core again, if nobody tells that person that they haven't understood one of those areas, how can their friend improve? So it's about telling them they have a responsibility in that way as well. And some people might say, oh, well, the teacher's the best person to interrupt. If you can see that, communication is breaking down, then the teacher could intervene. Okay, but the bottom line is that the best judge of ELF intelligibility is other ELF users. And so we can also convey that message to our students. Perhaps they haven't indicated that they don't understand because they don't have the language to do so. And so we also have a responsibility as teachers to give our students chunks of language, phrases, to show politely that they haven't understood. Pronunciation does not exist in a void, and a lot of work to do with ELF is going on in the world of discourse. So this kind of strays into that area. The other point to make for multilingual groups is the importance of mixing students with different students all the time. I'm sure we all do this to expose them to a range of different accents, if we've got that luxury at our disposal. And in Jennifer Jenkins' research, she actually said that it was more beneficial for students to be in pairs rather than groups, because it's easier to be faced with one different accent to yours rather than a range at one time. But what about for monolingual situations, especially for everyone watching online? That may be your situation. You don't perhaps have this range of accents within the class. And as I mentioned earlier, it may be harder then for students to imagine the ELF world that is out there. And so one thing we can do is bring statistics into the classroom to actually make students aware of that. Robin Walker's book is very useful, Teaching the Pronunciation of English as a Lingua Franca, and the reference is on your handout. And also the British Council has great statistics on their website. So if we can make students aware of the lingua franca world, then that can help. And also to make students aware that although communication might not break down in the classroom, because the other students share the same L1, so share presumably similar pronunciation features, it may be easier for them to understand each other. But when they go outside and speak to other speakers of other L1s, there may be areas, high-risk areas, that do lead to communication breakdown. And there's literature out there to help us understand which areas they could be. But if you're familiar with your student's L1, that may be easier for you anyway. And then if we do this, it means that students, when they're in an ELF context, if communication is breaking down, it means that they can think, ooh, maybe it's because I said this word, and I know that that includes a pronunciation feature that is a high-risk area for me. Maybe that other person hasn't understood, so maybe I need to reformulate it, and they can negotiate meaning that way. So we also need to focus in monolingual groups on giving students the phrases, the chunks, to reformulate. And in terms of awareness of high-risk differences, awareness of other speakers' high-risk differences, so other language backgrounds. So like Laura talked about with bringing authentic materials into the classroom, that's really important in a monolingual group where they're not so exposed to other languages. So if you know the student's L1, you're also at an advantage perhaps to talk about language variation. and attitudes to variation in regards to the actual L1 that you all share. And then you can talk about how that relates to English and variation in English. Any talk about attitudes towards variation needs to be done sensitively, but I think we need to credit our students with the maturity to do so. And if we can start by talking about attitudes within their own L1 and their own varieties within that language, perhaps that can help them to see how that relates. So there's a quote that I'd like to conclude this final part with, from Jennifer Jenkins. She says, "Speakers who find themselves together in an attempt to accomplish a particular task, the successful accomplishment of which is to their mutual advantage, will be instrumentally motivated to facilitate communication in order to achieve a successful outcome." So they'll be instrumentally motivated. And the focus really here is that students need to work together, they need to cooperate, but that cooperating is only going to help them both the speaker and the listener, if they work together.